My name is Derrick Broze. For the last decade, I've worked as an investigative journalist, hosting a radio show, writing books, and producing numerous documentaries about the realities of child trafficking, the dangers of technology, and indigenous struggles. Now, I aim to uncover whether there exists a network which ties these issues together. Many researchers posit the existence of an international cartel which covertly manipulates world events for their own benefit. Are these claims simply fantasy and paranoid delusion, or is there truly an agenda to subvert humanity to the demands of the pyramid of power?
Chapter 17, The Top of the Pyramid, Volume 1.
When I started this series, my goal was to find out if the conspiracies about the existence of an international cartel of individuals and institutions which manipulate our world for their own purposes are actually true. I've strived to maintain a fact-based, objective approach throughout this series with as little speculation and emotion as possible. I believe I've succeeded. I also believe over the last 16 episodes, we've proven beyond a doubt that there does exist families, institutions, and organizations which attempt to influence the world of politics, popular culture, media, education, and our mental and spiritual worlds.
While some people acknowledge that individuals and groups of people can corrupt elements of the systems we've covered, including the education system, the establishment media, the medical cartel, and organized religion, some people may still deny these groups collaborate with each other. However, we've proven that these groups not only corrupt systems, but work together to achieve goals that don't benefit humanity. These seemingly disparate elements actually interlock to become what I've referred to as the pyramid of power. Each piece of the pyramid serves to weaken the people in some capacity, whether our minds, our bodies, or our souls. Separately, they are dangerous enough, but together they combine to become a monolith which steamrolls over anyone who dare oppose the machine and attempt to live free.
While each of these chapters describe a piece of the pyramid or the tools with which it reigns, the question still remains: who or what is at the top of this control structure?
To attempt to answer this question, we must explore taboo topics which may make some viewers uncomfortable. As with every episode of this series, we'll rely on facts and primary sources, clearly noting any speculation on our part. While exact details may be lacking, we can use available evidence and critical thinking to draw conclusions about who sits at the top of the pyramid. Let's start by taking a look at the various suspects. The Deep State.
Over the last decade, the term deep state has gained popularity as a description of the hidden ruling class, or shadow government, who fund, control, and manipulate politicians. Though it is decades old, it has become widely known because of Donald Trump and the Make America Great Again movement.
However, Trump and MAGA often misuse the term deep state, limiting its meaning to long-serving government bureaucrats rather than the hidden powers behind governments and corporations. While such bureaucratic employees can be weaponized to serve the deep state's agenda, they are not the deep state itself. Trump has also led many to equate the term exclusively with the left, Democrats, or progressives. However, the origin of the word itself tells a different story. The first use of the term comes from Turkey and the phrase derin devlet, which roughly translates to deep state. In 1996, the Susurluk scandal revealed ties between a politician and a mafia figure, exposing a network linking Turkey's military, intelligence, paramilitary forces, and organized crime. This network became known as the Deep State. While its existence is debated in the West, many in Turkey have accepted it as a reality which impacts their politics and daily lives. In January 2007, Turkish Prime Minister Erdogan publicly acknowledged the Turkish Deep State on national TV. Quote, "I don't agree with those who say the Deep State does not exist. It does exist. It always has, and it did not start with the Republic. It dates back to Ottoman times. It's simply a tradition. It must be minimized and, if possible, even annihilated." According to historian Ryan Gingeris, deep state, quote, "generally refers to a kind of shadow or parallel system of government in which unofficial or publicly unacknowledged individuals play important roles in defining and implementing state policy." Gingeris says it is this parallel system which explains why politicians and so-called public servants often take actions which go directly against the spirit of the laws which the population at large is expected to follow. Before Trump took the term, bastardized it, and then popularized it in the mainstream political discourse, the term was introduced to the English-speaking world by Peter Dale Scott, a former Canadian diplomat, author, poet, and professor emeritus at the University of California, Berkeley. Scott first wrote about the term in his 2007 book, Road to 9/11: Wealth, Empire, and the Future of America, as well as introducing the terms deep political system and the study of deep political analysis. Scott credits Norwegian researcher Ola Tunander's concept of the dual state as the inspiration for his deep state. Scott draws important distinctions between his use of the term deep state and the way in which Trump and his supporters have come to use it.
It's like saying fascist or Nazi. The term is so corrupt now, it's just as well that we not use it. I will continue to use it in a technical way, but Trump bowdlerized the term. He really meant anybody in Washington who didn't like him, because there were some people in Washington that did like Trump, and for Trump, those were not the deep state, and the ones who didn't like him, that was Trump's definition of the deep state. But it came down very more specifically on the CIA and the NSA. So deep state became kind of a battle cry in the real struggle that was going on between Trump and the forces in Washington that didn't like him. And those forces happened to be the CIA and the NSA, very prominent also in my notion of the deep state. But my deep state is not limited to them. It involves, for example, Wall Street, where the whole idea of the CIA was first put forward back in 1946 when Truman didn't want it, and then virtually, I think, forced on Truman by the forces of big money and big oil at work in Washington.
Scott continued to outline his view of the deep state in his 2014 book, The American Deep State: Wall Street, Big Oil, and the Attack on U.S. Democracy, pointing to a network of Wall Street bankers, big oil corporations, crooked politicians, private surveillance firms, and the intelligence apparatus as responsible for what he terms deep events like the assassination of JFK and the 9/11 attacks.
In my view, the term deep state is akin to shadow government, referring to hidden forces which are involved in activities like money laundering, launching wars, false flag events, pandemics, and general chaos which allows them to impose order.
To understand who might be leading this deep state, we need to understand the players. Let's continue our search for the top of the pyramid by looking at one of the biggest financial firms in the world: BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. The rags to riches story behind BlackRock centers on Larry Fink, a down-on-his-luck banker who found success after initially losing $100 million in 1986. He proposed an investment firm focused on risk management to the founders of Blackstone Group. Over time, his venture became highly successful, eventually spinning off as BlackRock. Today, it is the world's largest asset management firm, managing over $11 trillion US. The public initially became aware of BlackRock during the 2007-2008 financial crisis, as Larry Fink played a key role in creating the first collateralized mortgage obligation, which was crucial in contributing to the subprime mortgage crisis. Fink became an advisor to U.S. Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner, and along with BlackRock, assisted the Federal Reserve in bailing out collapsing banks.
13 days ago, the Secretary of the Treasury came down to Capitol Hill, said that our markets are a mess, Wall Street's a mess, and if we don't give them $700 billion immediately, it's going to be a big problem. And they asked the Treasury, where did you come up with the number $700 billion? Here's the Treasury spokeswoman's quote: "It's not based on any particular data point. We just really wanted to come up with a really big number."
In the nearly 2 decades since the financial crisis, BlackRock has only become more powerful as they extend their reach into the political sphere. In 2020, Bloomberg referred to BlackRock as the fourth branch of government. In 2019, as Joe Biden was considering a presidential run, he reportedly went to meet with BlackRock and was told by Larry Fink, "I'm here to help." Fink also maintains a close relationship with US President Donald Trump, having known him for over 40 years due to both men having been involved in the Manhattan financial scene. In fact, in March 2025, it was announced that Larry Fink had consulted with Trump before he secured the purchase of 2 ports in the Panama Canal for BlackRock. Fink's relationships with presidents from both parties highlights how true power operates. They care not which party or figurehead sits in the White House. Fink admitted as much at the 2024 conference of the Security Industries and Financial Markets Association, stating, quote, "I'm tired of hearing this is the biggest election in your lifetime. The reality is, over time, it doesn't matter. We work with both administrations and are having conversations with both candidates." BlackRock's list of advisors, consultants, board members, and other important roles are riddled with former politicians and members of central banks, including Hillary Clinton's former chief of staff Cheryl Mills and Stanley Fischer, former head of the Bank of Israel and also vice chairman of the Federal Reserve. BlackRock was responsible for the little-known Going Direct Reset financial coup in September 2019, months before the declaration of the COVID-19 panic. BlackRock also played a central role in the bailing out of the US government during the panic. Larry Fink and BlackRock as an institution are obviously powerful. In Fink's annual Dear CEO letter, he advocates for specific policy recommendations. One analysis of the impact of Fink's letter found that portfolio firms are responsive to BlackRock's public engagement efforts.
You have to force behaviors. And if you don't force behaviors, whether it's gender or race or just any way you want to say the composition of your team, you're going to be impacted. And that's not recruiting, it is development, as Ken said. And ultimately, it's still going to take time, but I am just as much shocked as Ken is that we have not seen more opportunities. And we're going to have to force change.
Larry Fink and BlackRock use this power to influence the hundreds of corporations in which they hold shares. Though BlackRock is the more well-known risk management firm, they are not alone. They are one of the big three asset managers, the other two being State Street and Vanguard. Make no mistake, State Street and Vanguard wield the same power as BlackRock. In his February 2015 letter to 500 of Vanguard's largest holdings, then CEO William McNabb explicitly outlined the principles that Vanguard wanted to see from corporations. Quote, "In the past, some have mistakenly assumed that our predominantly passive management style suggests a passive attitude with respect to corporate governance. Nothing could be further from the truth." Of course, Vanguard's principles aligned with Larry Fink's recommendations, and despite minor differences, the big three can generally act in lockstep to influence international corporate policies.
So are the heads of BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard the top of the pyramid of power? I don't believe so. They clearly have access to massive amounts of wealth and corporate and political influence. They're an important piece of the puzzle, but I do not believe they are the top of the pyramid.
To continue our search for the top of the pyramid, let's take a look at one of Larry Fink's favorite organizations with whom he has maintained a friendly relationship, the World Economic Forum. In 2019, Larry Fink joined the Board of Trustees of the World Economic Forum. He's also a member of the Forum's International Business Council. The WEF meets every year in Davos, Switzerland to host politicians, academics, journalists, and leaders of NGOs and nonprofits. The forum largely entered the public consciousness in 2020 as the COVID hysteria began, and the World Economic Forum announced their Great Reset initiative. Curiously, on October 18, 2019, 5 months before COVID-19 was declared a pandemic, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation partnered with Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security and the World Economic Forum on a high-level pandemic exercise known as Event 201. Event 201 simulated how the world would respond to a coronavirus pandemic which swept around the planet. The simulation imagined 65 million people dying, mass lockdowns, quarantines, censorship of alternative viewpoints under the guise of fighting disinformation, and even floated the idea of arresting people who question the pandemic narrative.
But one thing we haven't spoken about is a step up from the part of the governments on enforcement actions against fake news, right? Some of us, these new regulations that come in place about how we deal with fake news. And maybe this is a time for us to showcase some cases where we are able to bring forward some bad actors and leave it before the courts to decide whether they have actually spread some fake news.
The launch of the Great Reset was supported by Klaus Schwab, the founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, England's Prince Charles, Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, and Kristalina Georgieva of the International Monetary Fund. In an opinion piece published in the Globe and Mail, Schwab provided more details on the goals of the Great Reset, stating, quote, "We must build entirely new foundations for our economic and social systems." Schwab detailed the three main components of the Great Reset agenda, including harnessing the innovations of what he calls the Fourth Industrial Revolution. First announced in 2015, Schwab's Fourth Industrial Revolution envisions a future of constant digital surveillance where technology alters and supposedly improves human life. Also known as the Internet of Things, or the Internet of Bodies, it relies on 5G and 6G technology. At the announcement of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, Schwab wrote, "Ubiquitous mobile supercomputing, intelligent robots, self-driving cars, neurotechnological brain enhancements, genetic editing. The evidence of dramatic change is all around us, and it's happening at exponential speed." This is the future Schwab and the World Economic Forum are fighting for. To more deeply understand their motivations, we need to revisit the group's origin story. The World Economic Forum traces its roots to Klaus Schwab's time at Harvard, where he attended the International Seminar and befriended its director, Henry Kissinger. Schwab says this experience sparked his interest in geopolitics. In a 2021 event held at Harvard in his honor, Schwab confirmed that the International Seminar and Kissinger had greatly influenced him.
Let me go back to the time you said when you came here, it transformed your life. Was there a course, a professor who really made that difference for you?
Yes, there was one course, one seminar of Henry Kissinger, which really opened my eyes. I wasn't accepted to the seminar, but I sat in. I think he let me in because I was German. And it was relatively shortly after the war. There were not too many Germans here. And this created a friendship which has endured until today. And Henry has been several times in Davos. And I think it was mainly participating in his seminars that I developed my interest for geopolitical affairs.
On April 16, 1967, reports revealed CIA funding for various Harvard programs, including $135,000 for Kissinger's international seminar. Kissinger denied any knowledge of the funding. This CIA-funded seminar helped connect Schwab with the American elite and set the stage for the 1971 European Management Symposium, which would eventually become the World Economic Forum in 1987. During the 1973 meeting of the World Economic Forum, Schwab and WEF attendees drafted the Davos Manifesto, which outlined Schwab's stakeholder capitalism concept. At this meeting, another key figure in the deep state's history was present, Aurelio Pace, the founder of the Club of Rome. The Club of Rome. In June 1965, Henry Kissinger, Raymond Aron, and Stanley Hoffman attended a seminar at Via Cervelloni in Italy on the conditions of world order. The Via had only recently become the property of the Rockefeller Foundation. The conference was sponsored by the Congress for Cultural Freedom with a grant from the Ford Foundation. The Congress for Cultural Freedom was outed as a CIA front in 1966, and the Ford Foundation has an extensive relationship with the CIA as well. At the 1965 meeting, Kissinger, as well as other scholars, writers, and scientists, met to define world order and establish a plan for promoting their vision of a single world government. The conference produced a report which included the following quote: "The establishment of world order depends not only on its intrinsic desirability and viability, but also on the support of men and groups who decide to dedicate themselves to the completion of such a goal. It is incumbent upon the intellectuals to play the decisive role in the formation of pressure groups in favor of a world order. The establishment of world order demands the mobilization of groups dedicated to international pressure for the gradual implementation of that world order." Around this time, Italian industrialist Aurelio Pace delivered a speech at the first meeting of the Atlantic Development Group for Latin America, an international consortium of bankers aimed at supporting industrialization in Latin America. His speech was so well received that then U.S. Secretary of State Dean Rusk translated the speech into English and shared it around D.C. By 1967, Pace would begin working with Scottish chemist Alexander King. The two men decided to collaborate on promoting greater international cooperation and planning for humanity's future. The first official meeting of the club was April 1968 with around 30 European economists and scientists at the Accademia dei Lincei in Rome. While this original meeting was not described as a huge success, it would lead to the formal creation of the Club of Rome by Pace and King. The Club of Rome decided to keep their membership at 100 full members selected from current and former heads of state and government UN administrators, high-level politicians and government officials, diplomats, scientists, economists, and business leaders. Alexander King was responsible for the controversial 1991 report titled The First Global Revolution. This report includes a section called The Common Enemy of Humanity is Man, which contains this often quoted section. In searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. In their totality and in their interactions, these phenomena do constitute a common threat which demands the solidarity of all peoples. But in designating them as the enemy, we fall into the trap about which we have already warned, namely, mistaking symptoms for causes. All these dangers are caused by human intervention, and it is only through changed attitudes and behavior that they can be overcome. The real enemy, then, is humanity itself. Some interpret this as the Club of Rome acknowledging that they'd use global emergencies like pollution and famine to unite governments behind the idea that humanity is the problem. The Club of Rome and their supporters argue it's taken out of context and merely highlights awareness of coming environmental challenges. As mentioned before, Aurelio Pache was at the World Economic Forum's 1973 meeting and presented a speech on his now infamous book, The Limits to Growth. This same meeting featured Henry Kissinger and was sponsored by Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, himself a prominent deep state actor who co-founded the much more secretive annual meeting known as the Bilderberg Group. The Bilderberg Group. The Bilderberg Group is one of the most private annual meetings of heads of state, media moguls, and journalists, academics, leaders in finance, and corporate bosses. Named after the 1954 meeting at the Bilderberg Hotel in the Netherlands, it's organized by a steering committee of former politicians, tech execs, academics, and media figures. Previous committee members include both Henry Kissinger and Klaus Schwab. The gathering operates under Chatham House rules, meaning that any information shared from the meetings to the public cannot be attributed to individual attendees. Chatham House rules can be traced back to the British Royal Institute of International Affairs and the American Council on Foreign Relations. The secrecy has contributed to the suspicion that the Bilderberg Group represents the true power which manipulates politicians and guides the destinies of nations. Attendees have included King Philippe of Belgium, King Charles III of the UK, former Canadian Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau, various commissioners of the European Union, Borje Brende of the World Economic Forum, David Petraeus, the fourth director of the CIA, Senator Lindsey Graham, and Rick Perry, former Republican governor of Texas and the Secretary of Energy under Donald Trump's first administration. The founding of the Bilderberg Group was initiated by Polish diplomat Joseph Redinger and Prince Bernhard. Redinger had been involved with the creation of the European League for Economic Cooperation and the European Movement International as part of his efforts to unite Europe. Redinger and Bernhard aimed to create a post-World War II transatlantic conference of influential Americans and Europeans. They enlisted support across Europe, including Dennis Healey, a British Labour Party politician, who would later serve as UK Defence Secretary. Healey was invited to the first meeting as a conduit to onboard influential Brits and would later be named a member of the steering committee. Redinger and Bernhard discussed the idea with CIA Director Walter Bedell Smith, who secured American support, including early funding from David Rockefeller. These conversations would lead to the first Bilderberg meeting in 1954, with Redinger serving as the permanent secretary until his death in 1960. Unfortunately, this official version of the founding of the Bilderberg Group ignores the mountain of evidence that their beginning was actually partially funded by American intelligence, specifically the CIA. In 1948, the American Committee for a United Europe was launched, with future CIA Director Allen Dulles as vice chairman and the CIA's Walter Bedell Smith serving on the board of directors. Government documents released in 2000 show that the ACUE financed Redinger's European movement, providing as much as 53% of the organization's funding. Over the past 50 years, many individuals with CIA ties have been linked to the Bilderberg Group. The most famous example is the group's co-founder Prince Bernhard. In 1976, Bernhard had been implicated in accepting bribes from defense contractor Lockheed Martin. The New York Times reported, quote, "But perhaps the most intriguing and unexplained element to the mystery surrounding Prince Bernhard is his apparent ties to the Central Intelligence Agency." Bernhard told the Times he'd done nothing wrong in relation to Lockheed, but then said, quote, "If you would ask me about my relations with the CIA, that would be a different matter." This begs the question, why would US intelligence want to fund and promote the Bilderberg Group? One explanation is that the intelligence network aimed to counter anti-American sentiment in post-World War II Europe, while Bilderberg was uniting the continent. However, critics of the Bilderberg Group point to statements by the founders and steering committee members suggesting a goal of creating a new international order or one world government. Let's start with David Rockefeller. Rockefeller was not only a regular attendee of Bilderberg, but also served as a member of the steering committee for a time. In his 2002 book Memoirs, he acknowledged his efforts to work with groups like Bilderberg in the interest of creating an international order, stating, quote, "For more than a century, ideological extremists at either end of the political spectrum have seized upon well-publicized incidents, such as my encounter with Castro, to attack the Rockefeller family for the inordinate influence they claim we wield over American political and economic institutions. Some even believe we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure. One world, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty and I am proud of it." Rockefeller specifically mentions his involvement with the Bilderberg Group and how the group has been maligned by so-called conspiracy theorists. Quote, "If the Council on Foreign Relations raises the hackles of conspiracy theorists, the Bilderberg meetings must induce apocalyptic visions of omnipotent international bankers plotting with unscrupulous government officials to impose cunning schemes on an ignorant and unsuspecting world. At the risk of disappointing these conspiracy mongers, the truth is that Bilderberg is really an intensely interesting annual discussion group that debates issues of significance to both Europeans and North Americans without reaching consensus." In his 2001 book, Them, Adventures with Extremists, author John Ronson interviewed Dennis Healy, the UK conduit for the Bilderberg Group and one-time steering committee member, about how the group functions. Healy was unusually candid about the goals of the group.
Conspiracy theorists say that the ultimate Bilderberg agenda is a one-world government.
I think that's exaggerated, but not totally unfair, in the sense that those of us in Bilderberg really felt that we couldn't go on forever fighting one another for nothing and killing people and rendering millions homeless. And to the extent that we could have a single community throughout the world would be a good thing.
Healy further explained, quote, "Bilderberg is a way of bringing together politicians, industrialists, financiers, and journalists. Politics should involve people who aren't politicians. We make a point of getting along younger politicians who are obviously rising to bring them together with financiers and industrialists who offer them wise words. It increases the chance of having a sensible global policy." Although the Bilderberg Group claims no official decisions are made at the meetings, many researchers point out that the creation of a European Union was one of the original goals discussed at Bilderberg by Joseph Redinger and Prince Bernhard. Despite growing awareness of Bilderberg, the group's 80 years of discourse remains largely opaque. After years of activists flying to their meetings and confronting attendees, the Bilderberg Group launched a website in the 2010s and now releases an annual vague list of topics. However, the outcomes of the meetings remain unknown. Current steering committee members are powerful and influential players in geopolitics, including José Manuel Barroso, chair of Goldman Sachs International, Borja Brende, president of the World Economic Forum, Alex Karp and Peter Thiel of Palantir, John McLeathwaite, editor-in-chief of Bloomberg, Satya Nadella, CEO of Microsoft, and Eric Schmidt, former CEO of Google. While the Bilderberg Group represents a component of the hidden ruling class, with their funding from intelligence networks and secret meetings where decisions are made behind closed doors, they are not the top of the pyramid.
If the Bilderberg Group is not the top, but yet another group representing those at the top, perhaps we need to look at another Bilderberg-aligned Rockefeller creation to see if we find the elusive ruling class.
The Trilateral Commission. In 1973, David Rockefeller funded the Trilateral Commission, expanding on the Bilderberg Group's goals. Where Bilderberg's focus was uniting the United States and Europe, the Trilateral Commission aimed to unite Japan, Western Europe, and North America to meet the economic challenges of the 1970s. The group has since expanded their focus to encouraging the nations of the world to, quote, return to their roots as countries sharing common values and a commitment to the rule of law, open economies and societies, and democratic principles. The Trilaterals first came to prominence during Jimmy Carter's presidency. Many members of the Trilateral Commission held high-level positions, including Cyrus Vance, Secretary of State, Harold Brown, Secretary of Defense, W. Michael Blumenthal, Secretary of the Treasury, Brock Adams, Secretary of Transportation, Andrew Young, Ambassador to the United Nations, and several others. Despite claiming to support democratic principles, the Trilateral Commission is criticized for undermining national sovereignty to promote a so-called New World Order. Its origins strongly align with the goals of a new international order and the technocratic state discussed in Chapter 13. David Rockefeller received help for his new group from his advisor, Zbigniew Brzezinski, the deep state agent who advised many American presidents, including Barack Obama and Jimmy Carter. Until his death in 2018, Brzezinski was also a member of the Atlantic Council, the National Endowment for Democracy, and the Council on Foreign Relations. In the early 1970s, Brzezinski left Columbia University to help Rockefeller organize the Trilateral Commission. The Columbia connection matters because the original technocracy movement of the 1930s began there. In fact, the beginning of the technocracy movement can be traced back to a group of technicians and social engineers who had organized the Committee on Technocracy at Columbia University. Howard Scott, a writer who founded the Technical Alliance in 1919, argued that engineers, not business owners, should run industries. In 1932, Scott and Walter Rottenstraat created the Committee on Technocracy at Columbia University. In many ways, Brzezinski's work with the Trilateral Commission was an extension of his Columbia-bred efforts to promote technocracy. Only 3 years before the formation of the Trilateral Commission, he released his infamous book, Between Two Ages: America's Role in the Technotronic Era. In Between Two Ages, Brzezinski acknowledges his belief that national sovereignty is, quote, no longer compatible with reality because emerging global consciousness is causing the, quote, abandonment of preoccupations with national supremacy in favor of global interdependence. This vision remains alive today, as described in March 2023 during the Trilateral Commission's 50th anniversary meeting in India. During this meeting, a speaker reportedly echoed support for a new world order. Quote, 3 decades of globalization has been replaced by what will be a multi-decade period of globalization defined as fragmented, not free market-based, but industrial policy-based and structurally inflationary. This year, 2023, is year 1 of this new global order. The news outlet could not identify the speaker's name because the Trilateral Commission operates under similar rules to the Bilderberg Group, which says quotes cannot be attributed to individual speakers. Current and former members of the Trilateral Commission include Anthony Blinken, former U.S. Secretary of State, Michael Bloomberg, founder and CEO of Bloomberg, George H.W. Bush, former President of the United States, Keir Starmer, the current Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Mark Carney, the current Prime Minister of Canada, Henry Kissinger, Larry Fink of BlackRock, Eric Schmidt, formerly CEO of Google, and even Jeffrey Epstein. Technocracy expert Patrick Wood believes the Trilateral Commission represents at least some of the upper echelon of the pyramid of power.
Back in 1973, the people who were at the top of the pyramid right then were pretty much represented by members of the Trilateral Commission. They were very elite type of people from various industries, from media, from legal communities, from big bankers, from multinational corporations, and so on. Some of them were just rich, but there was a broad spectrum of people back then, but it was a small group. There was only 180 people initially in the Trilateral Commission when it first formed. It's still alive today, still operating. The membership is greater now. I think it's around maybe 280, 300 now on a perpetual basis. But they have done an inordinate amount of orchestration over the years to make these policies come to pass.
However, Wood cautions against focusing exclusively on the Trilateral Commission.
I wouldn't just make a list of 500 people and say, okay, this is it. That wouldn't be possible, and probably certainly be wrong. But you can look at that group of people and you would see a network pop out that would say, yep, these are the people who are pulling the strings. And they have the money to do it, most important. They have the means to do it. If it was just you and me talking in the back room over a cup of coffee or adult beverage or whatever, it would just be talk. But if we were trillionaires or multi-billionaires and we're talking in the back room and we're thinking, we could do this, let's take our money, let's combine our money together or whatever, let's go out there and start pulling some strings and do it. That's a whole different bailiwick. All of a sudden the talk becomes a conspiracy because they have the means to do it, and then it becomes potentially a criminal event after that. Maybe not, but it becomes an event after that when they actually start taking steps to do those things because they have the resources and money to do it.
Despite the economic power of BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, and the influence of groups like the World Economic Forum, the Bilderberg Group, and the Trilateral Commission, these organizations are still only the representatives of the true power. They are part of a complex structure known as the Round Table Groups. The Round Table Groups. In 1966, Georgetown professor Carroll Quigley published Tragedy and Hope, A History of the World in Our Time, a 1,300-page history of the Western world from 1880 to 1963. The book is well known in conspiracy circles for revealing a secret society that shaped British and American foreign policy. Quigley's theories stem from him being granted rare access to the archives of the Council on Foreign Relations, a powerful think tank founded in 1921 with members from politics, intelligence, business, and media. The CFR has been heavily funded by the Ford and Rockefeller Foundations throughout its existence. After reviewing the CFR archives, Quigley discovered a secret society formed by two British groups who took inspiration from writer John Ruskin and aimed to expand the British Empire. One group came from Cambridge University, while the other group came from Oxford University and included Alfred Milner, also known as Lord Milner. Milner was a British politician involved in foreign and domestic policy at the end of the 1800s and early 1900s. In Tragedy and Hope, Quigley writes, quote, "There does exist, and has existed for a generation, an international Anglophile network which operates to some extent in the way the radical right believes the Communist Act. In fact, this network, which we may identify as the Round Table Groups, has no aversion to cooperating with communists or any other groups, and frequently does so. I know of the operations of this network because I have studied it for 20 years and was permitted for 2 years in the early 1960s to examine its papers and secret records. I have no aversion to it or most of its aims, and have, for much of my life, been close to it and to many of its instruments. I have objected both in the past and recently to a few of its policies, but in general, my chief difference of opinion is that it wishes to remain unknown, and I believe its role in history is significant enough to be known." According to Quigley, British journalist William T. Stead was the link between these groups and Cecil Rhodes, the infamous founder of the De Beers Mining Company and colonial politician who gained his vast wealth by entering the South African diamond market in 1871. Rhodes received financial funding from Rothschild & Co., allowing him to buy and consolidate diamond mines and create a near monopoly on the industry. Together, Rhodes and Stead formally established the secret society on February 5, 1891. Rhodes would lead the society, with Stead, Milner, and British politician Reginald Brett, also known as Lord Esher, leading the executive committee. Upon Rhodes's death in 1902, the Rhodes Scholarships were set up to provide a graduate scholarship program which could bring young, influential, and impressionable young men into the nexus of the Round Table. Recipients included prime ministers and former U.S. President Bill Clinton. Rhodes prepared 7 wills to be fulfilled at his death. His first will proposed using his wealth to, quote, "create a secret society patterned on the Jesuits," also known as the Society of Jesus. Forensic historian Richard Grove has studied Rhodes's plan extensively.
William T. Stead was in charge of the review of reviews. It was a big round table hub in Britain, and he and Rhodes had come up with the idea for the British Empire to take America back into it, and for the purposes of doing that, to create a secret society and a group of scholarships that would Anglicize Americans and others around the world into the English-speaking idea, so that Rhodes's idea had funding, it had an academic aspect, it had a secret society aspect. Now it's not just Tragedy and Hope telling you about Rhodes. You got his last will and testament, and you can go out on your own and verify.
Milner was Rhodes's chosen successor and popularized the model of discussion groups with a public journal representing the views of secret groups hiding in the shadows. This became known as the Round Table Groups. It is this Round Table model which led to the creation of the British Royal Institute of International Affairs in 1920 and the American counterpart, the Council on Foreign Relations, in 1921. Quigley calls the Royal Institute the, quote, legitimate child of the Round Table organization, and notes that the Institute was, quote, formed by the Cecil Block and the Milner Group acting together, and the real decisions were being made by members of the latter. He claims the CFR was a front group for banking house J.P. Morgan & Company. Quigley also identified how these Round Table groups based in the Eastern establishment could control the political outcomes of the United States. Quote, the argument that the two parties should represent opposed ideals and policies, one perhaps of the right and the other of the left, is to the Eastern establishment a foolish idea acceptable only to doctrinaire and academic thinkers. Instead, they believe that the two parties should be almost identical, without leading to any profound or extensive shifts in policy. In a 1974 interview with Washington Post journalist Rudy Maxa, Quigley complained about his book gaining popularity in right-wing circles. In 1975, Maxa would publish an article titled "The Professor Who Knew Too Much," detailing Quigley's concerns that his words were being taken out of context, especially by political agitators such as Cleon Skousen, an ex-FBI agent and the author of The Naked Capitalist. An audio recording of the interview reveals that Quigley was critical of not only Skousen, but also Gary Allen, author of None Dare Call It Conspiracy. In his conversation with Maxa, Quigley does acknowledge that this group was, quote, closely linked to international bankers and was attempting to, quote, federate the English-speaking world into the broader Commonwealth of the English Empire. However, Quigley criticized Allen and Skousen for misinterpreting his claims, saying that their world domination theory was actually a union of the Atlantic bloc of nations. He lamented that so-called conspiracy theorists were attempting to link the Rhodes Group to Jewish conspiracies or the Bavarian Illuminati. He claimed the Rhodes Group had lost relevance by World War II. He did concede that he believed there was, quote, probably a continuous sequence of secret societies, specifically in Italian revolutionary movements from 1794 to the unification of Italy in the 1860s. Interestingly, Quigley also warned the journalist several times that he shouldn't be talking about certain aspects of this history.
Now, here's what happened, and I don't know whether we want to get this on tape, but I'll put it on tape. But look, you've got to be discreet. Sure. You know, you have to protect my future, as well as your own. Now, I don't think we should talk too much about this. Well,
Quigley stated that he generally supported the group's mission, but disagreed with their secrecy. In Tragedy and Hope, he outlines his hope that the group might succeed and bring peace to parts of the world that he saw as backward. Quote, the chief aims of this elaborate, semi-secret organization were largely commendable: to coordinate the international activities and outlooks of the English-speaking world into one, to work to maintain peace, to help backward, colonial, and underdeveloped areas to advance towards stability, law and order, and prosperity. However, writing in his follow-up book, The Anglo-American Establishment, published 4 years after his death, Quigley appears to have come to believe in the danger of the roundtable groups and their secret mission. Quigley warns, quote, no country that values its safety should allow what the Milner Group accomplished in Britain, that is, that a small number of men should be able to wield such power in administration and politics. In his book, Quigley details the operations of the secret society, naming Rhodes's group the Society of the Elect, with the outer circle known as the Association of the Helpers. He described the organizational structures as, quote, a series of overlapping circles or rings, partly concealed by being hidden behind formally organized groups of no obvious political significance. While he denied their goal was world domination, their actions suggest a push for a one-world government. Much like David Rockefeller and other influential members of the deep state, we find statements in support of eroding national and local sovereignty. For example, Quigley discusses Arnold J. Toynbee, the British historian and the director of studies at the Chatham House from 1929 to 1956. Toynbee's uncle was part of the group of intellectuals which Lord Milner came to dominate. In 1931, the younger Toynbee gave a speech to Chatham House in Copenhagen titled The Trend of International Affairs Since the War. Quote, if we are frank with ourselves, we shall admit that we are engaged on a deliberate and sustained and concentrated effort to impose limitations upon the sovereignty and the independence of the 50 or 60 local sovereign independent states which at present partition the habitable surface of the earth and divide the political allegiance of mankind. I will not prophesy, I will merely repeat that we are at present working, discreetly but with all our might, to wrest this mysterious political force called sovereignty out of the clutches of the local national states of our world, and all the time we are denying with our lips what we are doing with our hands. While there may be no direct link from Rhodes's group to today's organizations, there is absolutely an ideological thread connecting the original roundtable groups to the current deep state. If groups like the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderberg Group, the Mont Pelerin Society, and more secretive groups like Les Circle are merely the outer circle, it raises the question, who is running the inner circle? In this series, I've used the term predator class as a placeholder for the hidden inner circle of the roundtable groups. But the time for euphemisms is over. It's time to name names. The Committee of 300. One theory regarding who sits at the top of the pyramid claims there are 300 representatives of various deep state organizations directing the plans of this international conspiracy. The earliest version of this theory dates back to German industrialist, intellectual, and politician Walter Rathenau, who wrote an article in 1909 which stated, quote, 300 men, each of whom knows the others, guides the economic destinies of the continent, and seeks successors among their followers. After World War I, Rathenau's quote about 300 men became propaganda for Germans who believed he was referring to Jews. As a German Jew, Rathenau received death threats and was eventually assassinated in 1922 by 3 men who believed he was one of the 300. However, his essay actually criticized the oligarchy controlling Europe and proposed ways to dismantle it, highlighting the danger of nepotism and favoritism in elite financial circles. He states, quote, "It is important that the successors do not come only from a small group, but from the whole society. Only this way can one ensure that the best minds, the best talents, the best characters enter the economy. This opening will not be easy because it means a break with old traditions, with old power structures." 15 years after Rathenau's statements, Arthur Cherep-Spiritovich, a former Russian general and an opponent of the Bolshevik Revolution, also claimed that 300 people secretly run world affairs. After emigrating to New York in 1922, he said his unpublished book describing this conspiracy was seized by armed men claiming to be U.S. government agents. He later formed the Anglo-Latino Slavs League to unite white races against Jews and people of color, warning of an impending race war. In 1926, he published The Secret World Government, claiming the hidden hand was led by the Rothschilds, national bank heads, and international royalty. He frequently referenced the 300, linking them to Jewish leaders and Mongols. He wrote, quote, "And 300 of the worst Jews, Satanists, compose the hidden hand. The invisible Judeo-Mongol world government is headed since 1770 by the dynasty of Rothschild." Cherep-Spiritovich specifically pointed to Edward Alphonse James de Rothschild, also known as Baron Edward de Rothschild, as the uncrowned ruler of the world who controls, quote, "the 300 men of the hidden hand and 90% of the world's press." Shortly after publishing the book, he would be found dead in a hotel. His death has been reported as a suicide or a murder, depending on the source. In 1996, John Coleman published The Conspirators' Hierarchy, the Committee of 300, continuing the concept of 300 people ruling the world. Coleman claimed to be a retired professional intelligence officer in the UK, and while these claims were never verified, he said he had, quote, "many occasions to access highly classified documents." Coleman says this began a journey to uncover what power controls the British and US governments.
It's taken me 25 years to come to the conclusions that I have come to. And I want to tell you that one of the biggest things I discovered in my work was the existence of a supranational committee composed of 300 men. I came across this quite by accident when I was serving in Africa, in Angola, and I was given a series of documents which were only supposed to be handed in to top-level people. They were what we called above the top level of classification of intelligence documents. And there I discovered that whilst I thought I was in Africa fighting against the invasion of the communists, I was in fact fighting to introduce socialist regimes in the black African countries, and that I was actually working for a committee called the Committee of 300, also known in intelligence circles as the Olympians.
Though his book doesn't mention Rathenau or Spiritovich, Coleman referenced Rathenau in talks. He claimed a Committee of 300 was made up of leaders from secret societies, front organizations, government agencies, banks, insurance companies, international business, the petroleum industry, and the hundreds of thousands of entities and foundations. He said this committee is the, quote, ultimate controlling body that runs the world and has done so for at least 100 years. While Coleman says the Committee of 300 is known as the Olympians in intelligence circles, he provides no evidence. He says the committee is made up of the Royal Institute for International Affairs, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Bilderbergers, the Trilaterals, and the Club of Rome, claiming that there are at least 40 known branch offices of this committee. Coleman writes, quote, "The Club of Rome is a conspiratorial umbrella organization, a marriage between Anglo-American financiers and the old black nobility families of Europe, particularly the so-called nobility of London, Venice, and Genoa. We will be revisiting this claim about a black nobility shortly." John Coleman's theory of a Committee of 300, made up of representatives from academia, banking, media, and other industries, aligns with the power structure we've discussed. Coleman claims the inner circle of the round tables is the Olympians, where all decisions are made and power truly lies.
While John Coleman disagreed with Spiritovich that the Jews are the top of the pyramid or running the alleged Committee of 300, there are in fact many people who do subscribe to this theory. In Volume 2 of Chapter 17, we will explore these claims further. Until then, thank you for watching.